The world only permitted Arnold Schwarzenegger to be strong, which is his tragedy. On the stage of Mr. Olympia, we recall the most flawless body in history. Recall how the Terminator managed to walk through flames unharmed. In front of millions of voters, recall the California governor taking the oath of office by raising his hand. On the Hollywood red carpet, recall the self-assured smile of the man who appeared to have no flaws. Arnold was transformed by the world into an unbeatable symbol, a flawless machine made of steel muscles and unwavering determination. Something that could not be destroyed by any situation, failure, or adversary. However, the world frequently fails to notice, or is prohibited from seeing, that there has always been a heart-born flaw in that flawless machine. Arnold Schwarzenegger was born with a congenital heart abnormality, an undetectable fissure that no action role could permanently conceal, no political office could repair, and no muscle could seal. The crack then spread beyond his chest. It permeated his love, deceit, betrayal of those closest to him, and 15 years of concealing an illegitimate kid while presenting himself to the public as the epitome of perfection. The first image shows 23-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger standing on the Mr. Olympia stage in 1970. His physique was deemed the most flawless sculpture ever made by humans. The stage lights illuminated every muscle curve as if he had been sculpted from marble rather than born of flesh and bone, and the audience rose to applaud. Picture 2. At 76, Arnold Schwarzenegger lay on the Cleveland Clinic operation table. His chest parted. He laughed when he woke up after the surgeon's hands had implanted a pacemaker inside. I started to act more like a machine. There was more to that joke than just amusement. For a man who had dedicated his entire life to becoming unbreakable, it was a sad time in his life. Because the man's heart had to rely on a real machine to keep beating after spending his entire life dreaming of becoming a machine. He was only able to be strong because of the world. However, what happens if the body, which he spent his entire life shaping into the ideal weapon, stops pretending to be powerful? What is concealed by the armor? When internal cracks start to appear in the armor, please subscribe to the channel and give Arnold a like before we delve beneath the surface of strength to discover the true person. We need to go back to a tiny home above the police station in the Austrian village of Thal, close to the city of Graz, in order to comprehend why Arnold Schwarzenegger dedicated his life to creating that armor. In the 1950s, Austria was in ruins following World War II, with a collapsing economy and a generation of wounded soldiers returning from the front lines. The suffering started throughout the war and was brutally passed down through the generations. The second son of Gustav and Aurelia Schwarzenegger, Arnold Alois Schwarzenegger, was born on July 30, 1947. During World War II, Gustav served as an army officer in the Nazi Party and suffered serious injuries at the Battle of Stalingrad. For 3 days, he was buried behind debris. He came home utterly shattered after the war. Arnold subsequently said that Austria at the time was a nation of shattered men and that his father spent the remainder of his life in agony. Gustav joined the police department, rose to the position of local police chief, and managed the family with strict military discipline in the only manner he knew. But darkness wasn't always Gustav. Arnold characterized his father as having a dual personality, at times being kind and compassionate. However, there were occasions when he returned home intoxicated at 3 in the morning, the M roaring, and the 2 kids cuddled up on the bed with their hearts racing, fearing that he would turn on them or beat their mother at any time. For even the smallest infractions, Arnold and his elder brother Meinhard received belt beatings, hair pulls, and other forms of punishment. Arnold described this as the typical method used by German-Austrian parents at the time to subdue their children's will. Gustav made the 2 sons compete with one another for breakfast every morning. The winner was the only one whose suspicion that Arnold might not be Gustav's legitimate son, and he openly favored Meinhard. One could eat. It wasn't a game. Inside their own house, it was survival. There was an unwritten lesson was taught to a child growing up in that setting. One must compete for love. The only thing that matters is strength, and even a little moment of weakness will result in instant punishment. At 3 in the morning, 2 kids experienced the same conditions, the same father, the same beatings, and the same terror. The M, but responded in entirely different ways. Arnold used the suffering as motivation. Each blow turned into an opportunity to get stronger. Every reprimand served as evidence that he needed to leave that location. The boy's internal resistance was so intense that it destroyed everything else, even his right to cry and acknowledge his pain. The older brother, Meinhard, who was the father's favorite, was crushed. Because of the cruelty in the family, Meinhard was more brittle and became ash rather than steel. He started drinking and was unable to quit. Arnold went on to say that the same thing that wrecked my brother was also what shaped me into the person I am today. A truth is revealed in that statement. Arnold's fabled strength wasn't natural. It was a cephal system, the response of a child who is besieged and has no other option than to transform into something unbreakable. He would never again allow himself to be weak in front of anyone for the remainder of his life as a result of that process. At the age of 14, Arnold watched Hercules in the Haunted World, starring former Mr. Universe champion Reggae Park, in a movie theater in 1961. A man with a flawless body who was admired by everyone was shown on the screen. For the rest of his life, the youngster saw the plan when he glanced up. The body, not music, not soccer. His father would never be able to breach the body's fortress. The child began erecting a wall between himself and the yelling at 3 in the morning every time he lifted weights after that day. The M. Each new muscle served as an additional layer of defense. Every kilogram of weight lifted was a brick in the stronghold he promised no one would ever destroy. At the age of 21, Arnold emigrated to America from Austria in 1968. He left behind his father and older brother, the house above the police station, and his upbringing. 3 years later, in 1971, Meinhard died at 24 in a drunk driving vehicle accident. 1 year after that, in 1972, Gustav died of a stroke. Arnold attended neither funeral. He did not fly back to Austria when his brother died. When his father passed away, he did not take off again. The boy had found the blueprint. Now he would build the machine, and that machine would be so beautiful that no one, not even himself, would see the fracture inside. In 1968, Arnold Schwarzenegger, at 21, walked off the plane in Los Angeles with weak English, nearly little money in his pocket, but carrying something more significant than any asset, a blueprint cleared down to the final detail in his head. Joe Weider, the kingpin of American bodybuilding, had seen the potential and invited the young Austrian over under his patronage. The small community of Thal is completely cut off from the world of Venice Beach, Gold's Gym, and Muscle Beach. Arnold, however, did not just go from Austria. He left the entire past behind. Layer by layer of muscle and layer by layer of armor, a new person, a new land, a new language, and most importantly, a new body is being constructed every day. In actuality, Arnold had already penned the legend's opening sentence before arriving in the United States. He became the youngest person in history to win the title of Mr. Universe in 1967 at the age of 20. Among hundreds of athletes from all over the world, his body stood out as the most flawless on the global stage. Once made to compete with his brother for breakfast, and suspected by his father of not being his own son, the youngster now had something that everyone on the earth had to acknowledge. However, darkness continued to creep beneath the brightness just here, at the first peak. Because no title on earth could make up for the fact that he won while his brother and father were still in Austria, drinking and breaking. At the age of 23, Arnold defeated the most formidable opponent in bodybuilding history, Sergio Oliva, to win his first Mr. Olympia in 1970, making history as the youngest champion to hold the sport's top title. He ruled without interruption for 6 years, From 1970 to 1975, he was untouchable. Experts described his body as the most flawless sculpture ever produced by the union of human will and nature. The toughest competitors like Sergio Oliva, Lou Fingo, and Frank Zane were overwhelmed not only by superior physical prowess, but also by the psychological strategies Arnold was renowned for employing to depress opponents before they even took the stage. Arnold became the face of the bodybuilding movement after the 1977 release of the documentary Pumping Iron, which transformed bodybuilding from a specialized sport that few people were interested in into a popular culture phenomenon. After 5 years of retirement, he returned in 1980 and won his 8th Mr. Olympia. This decision caused a great deal of controversy because many people thought he didn't deserve it that year. However, Arnold was unconcerned about the incident. A victory was a victory, and he had amassed enough trophies to leave his mark on history. On the outside, however, the flawless machine concealed a secret. Arnold acknowledged using anabolic steroids for 4 months a year in the early 1970s to get ready for the Mr. Olympia competitions in the 2023 Netflix documentary series. He underlined that the use was prevalent in bodybuilding at the time, legal, and carried out under medical supervision. However, lawful does not equate to innocuous. The man was willing to use chemicals within his body in order to achieve his obsession with creating the ideal body on the outside. And that exposes an aspect of Arnold that few people choose to confront. He saw the body as a tool that needed to be subdued at all costs, not a temple, a weapon, or a gift. Did the steroids have a role in his subsequent cardiac issues? According to medical professionals, Arnold's heart valve problem was congenital and unrelated to steroid use. However, the question continues to linger like a ghost that no one can fully exterminate. And this is the paradox that nobody recognized throughout the bodybuilding era. Arnold had a congenital bicuspid aortic valve abnormality, which required the heart to pump blood through the narrower valve more forcefully than usual. Not a single doctor, coach, or even Arnold himself was aware of this condition. The symptoms were totally hidden by the body of an excellent athlete. From the beginning, the world's most ideal body was encasing a faulty heart. Even the man who built it was unaware of the machine's crack. Arnold switched his attention to Hollywood when bodybuilding was no longer big enough for his aspirations. And all of the film industry's experts agreed that he couldn't succeed. Schwarzenegger had an excessively long name. Nobody could recall it. The Austrian accent was overpowering. His voice was entirely dubbed in his debut movie, Hercules in New York, since the company believed that viewers wouldn't comprehend what he was saying. A foreigner could never be a main man in America, and the body was too large for acting. However, Arnold performed what he had done best at the Thal home since he was a young boy. He used every vulnerability as a weapon. The Austrian accent gained notoriety. The enormous body turned into an impenetrable brand, and the name Schwarzenegger became a household name because it was unlike any other. This was the same psychological process from childhood that turned adversity into fuel and made the world kneel down and admit what it claimed was impossible. Arnold became well known in Hollywood in 1982 because to Conan the Barbarian. He was practically destined to play the part of the barbaric warrior who uses all of his strength to subjugate the world. 2 years later, however, the genuine door opened in a way that nobody had anticipated. Director James Cameron originally intended for Arnold to play Kyle Ree, the human character, and O.J. Simpson to play the Terminator in 1984. However, Cameron discovered that no one could market O.J. Simpson as a murderous machine during a meeting at a Los Angeles restaurant. Arnold was that machine, but he wasn't playing the part of the T-800, the futuristic assassin robot that is fearless, painless, and never stops. All he had to do was be himself. Because he had spent his entire life transforming himself into something unbreakable up until that point. Then 3 words appeared on the screen. "I'll be back." 3 words that went on to become the most well-known line in movie history. However, A closer examination reveals that it was also the pledge Arnold made to himself throughout his life. As he consistently recovered from setbacks, scandals, heart surgeries, and other situations where the world believed he was done, it wasn't merely dialogue from a movie. It was a way of living. The trip that started when the 14-year-old lad watched Rhaegar Park in Hercules in a Graz movie theater was completed with The Terminator. The plan was now a reality. The world adored the image of Arnold, who was now literally the immortal machine on film, to the point where they never wanted to see anything else. And the same image that Arnold crafted imprisoned him. He created an empire with a never-ending run of successful movies during the 1980s and 1990s. Commando, Predator, Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop, and Terminator 2, Judgment Day, which brought in $520 million worldwide, followed by True Lies, which brought in $379 million, for a total of more than $4 billion at the box office. He was more than simply muscle, though. Jingle All the Way, the twins' Kindergarten Cop, demonstrated his amazingly innate sense of humor. It turns out that the world's strongest man was also one of the most endearing. Additionally, one little-known detail reveals everything about Arnold's worldview. Investments in real estate had already made him a millionaire. Before becoming a movie star, he used bodybuilding money to purchase apartment buildings in Santa Monica. He was never reliant on Hollywood. He was always prepared. This is the attitude of someone who experienced instability as a child, constantly constructing several strongholds, never just one, because the child in the Thal home had discovered that everything may fall apart at any time. Perfect career, perfect body, and perfect finances. The ideal family was all that was needed to finish the project. And Arnold discovered it in America's most influential family. Arnold Schwarzenegger met Maria Shriver in 1977 at a Robert F. Kennedy-named charity function. And that encounter would alter his life's course in a way that no Hollywood part or Mr. Olympia title could match. Maria was not your typical woman. She was the niece of President John F. Kennedy, an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning journalist, a member of America's most influential political family, and a self-reliant professional, intelligent, and resilient woman who was raised in a household where excellence was expected rather than optional. Arnold was an Austrian immigrant, a Republican, and a former bodybuilder. His English accent was so strong that he was dubbed in movies. Arnold's unadulterated physical might and the Kennedy family's cerebral political influence combined to create what many close to them called a perfect combination. They both had a strong desire to compete. They both had a peculiar sense of humor that only they could relate to, and they were devoted to their families. They tied the knot at the wedding of the year in April 1986, with 4 children: Catherine in 1989, Christina in 1991, Patrick in 1993, and Christopher in 1997. Arnold and Maria established their reputation as a model family over the course of the following 10 years. On paper, this marriage was ideal, and Arnold had filled in the last gap in his life's plan. However, Arnold's plan was incapable of stopping. He stunned the entire country in 2003 when he defeated incumbent Governor Gray Davis in a historic recall election to become the governor of California. This event's symbolic significance extended well beyond politics. Once scarcely able to speak English, a young immigrant boy from a little Austrian village was now in charge of the nation with the 5th largest economy in the world, surpassing the GDP of the majority of nations. This was the epitome of the American dream, pure, brilliant, and nearly unattainable. He signed Assembly Bill 32 on climate change in 2006, while serving 2 terms from 2003 to 2011, making California a leader in environmental protection. And when everything else fell apart, this would become his greatest and most lasting political legacy. By this time, Arnold Schwarzenegger had finished the blueprint, had the most flawless body in bodybuilding history, was the biggest action star in Hollywood, was the governor of the most powerful state in America, was the husband of a Kennedy woman, had 4 children, was one of the most powerful men in America, and the fortress he had built over 40 years appeared impregnable. However, the castle had long been cracked. Furthermore, the crack did not originate from the exterior. 6 women came out shortly before the 2003 governor race, claiming that Arnold had groped them for decades on movie sets and in several other situations. Later on, the figure increased to 15. Arnold won the race in spite of the accusations, which his supporters described as a political hit meant to undermine the campaign. He didn't publicly apologize and acknowledge that the behavior was inappropriate until 20 years later, in the 2023 Netflix documentary series. Although the world was unaware of it at the time, this was the first indication that the indestructible armor had a pattern beneath it, that no office, no muscle, and no attorney could permanently protect. However, compared to any charge, the true break, the one that would ruin everything, had occurred much earlier and had been concealed much more skillfully. When Maria took the 4 kids on vacation in 1996 while filming Batman and Robin, Arnold had an affair with Mildred Patricia Bayana, the Guatemalan maid who had been employed by the family since 1991 in the guest house of their California property. Just 5 days after the birth of Christopher, Arnold's youngest kid with Maria, Joseph Bina was born in October 1997.